Hello and welcome to the DevOps Career Talks. A lot of you who are existing DevOps engineers might be wondering about what it takes to become a site reliability engineering or maybe have heard of production engineering as well. Now, it's a common practice to loosely use the DevOps and SRE terms interchangeably. But I believe that there is more to SRE than just being a DevOps, and I see it as a more advanced role to specialize for a DevOps engineer as well. While I think about all of these are my opinions, we're actually going to hear about what it takes to be a SRE engineer, what is production engineering from someone who has been in this field for a while. So today we welcome Vanita Moide, who is the principal production engineer at Yahoo. And while Yahoo may not be at its glory today, but the culture of site reliability and production engineering would have prevailed in organizations like Yahoo. That's where we want to talk to Vanita and find out what it took for her to get into this role, what are the challenges, and what she enjoys about it. And today's guest is very special to me because we studied in the same engineering school. I think this goes back to we graduated in 2004, I think, Vanita.
Yes,
So,
2004.
welcome, Vanita. And let's get started with your journey very briefly, right? So, and the audience is very keen to understand mainly your journey, how you got into SRE, and now you are part of the production engineering. So, how does that journey look like?
Sure. So let me start with, so I've been with Yahoo now for like 15 years. Currently, my position is principal production engineer. Prior to that, I did my master's over here in US, and then I worked at IBM. So while I did my master's, I was very much interested in the databases, and then I learned a lot about databases. That led me to the opportunity at IBM. So at IBM, they had this Tivoli backup end client, and there I was developing all the test scripts, and then I learned Perl over there. So until then, I was all in Java before this. But then into Perl was still not too bad, and then they had their own libraries, own test cases. And at IBM, there was a different setup, as in like this is like global team over there, learning that aspect of it, like working globally, writing those test cases.
When you say you started working on Perl, because Perl, I mean, happened to be maybe a lot of people don't know about this, but Perl used to be one of the also scripting languages that people used to use along with now Python is very prominent and everyone probably knows about it. But was your work related to towards the scripting side of things, or was it towards more of a application and modules and programming?
Became more of scripting at that time, and but more of like test development. From software engineer, it almost turned to like a test developer at that time. So right,
Got it.
yeah, all the Perl scripts, and then Java, like the UI was there, so they were like the UI scripts. With every build, we would run our scripts and see what failed, and then just to see whether it is like a application.
That's probably what we can call as a predecessor to what we do with CI/CD today,
Correct, exactly. Yeah, and that is how the
minus
yeah.
minus the Jenkins and the tooling, I think.
Yeah. So we did some part of even those pipelines actually, even at IBM. So building the test scripts and basically, yeah, hitting all your test scripts across the latest build and seeing what fails and what passes, and then basically debugging all those failures and acceptance, whatever that reporters generated. Now moving on to Yahoo, because I had already the database, the testing, the development, the team that I was in, it was more for like database to start with, like a software engineer.
Was it like a database reliability, what we call as a database reliability engineer kind of a role today, or was it similar to that, or more of a database administration?
Yeah, database administration job. And then, but because the whole previous experience was in the development, I was still getting, like, I was still doing a lot of development over there too. So I started with some projects, some automations, whatever I could see. The very first project, so this is a very interesting story. When I started at IBM, there was like very fixed process, like, hey, as a newcomer, what you're supposed to do, you know, your document, you follow this document, and then you get access to production systems. I come at Yahoo, the very first day I asked my manager, like, hey, is there a document that I need to follow? Like, so he was like, how would you prepare one? And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I just say, okay, I'll do it. And then I go to the whole team, like, have one on one with every person within the team. If there is a new joinee, what are they supposed to do? And then I get into that document, I prepare it. And then, so after me, whoever has joined, my manager tell that, hey, ask her because she has like the whole document created.
So you brought the IBM processes
Yeah,
into the Yahoo.
yeah. So I
Right, and it's Yahoo. I think probably works like more used to work like at that point definitely like a more like a large startup
Yeah,
probably.
startup. Yeah. And so it was more like, okay. And then I was like, whoa, I have this freedom. So it never felt like I'm like a newcomer or, just like a recent grad joining the team. I was given that opportunity right away. Like, hey, you are part of the team. You
So
can,
you,
yeah, you can decide. And it doesn't matter like just because you're new,
since you're adding the value, you're free to do whatever
right.
you
And
are.
then that doc would get every time somebody would join, then they would read out and like, hey, if there is something like, can we add this part or that part? Then depending on how your role is, the document was just getting tweaked around.
So you became more like a technical writer plus
Yeah.
data.
So yeah. So then it was more like, your software engineering skills are there, your testing skills are coming in, your database administration skills were getting added up. And then because there were also ops like database ops, okay, there's like database operations team. So I was more into like having that one-on-one with everybody. You kind of get a sense of how their journey has been. Getting to Yahoo by that time, and then adding on to them is like, hey, is there any project like that I could help? Because I was still into that development mindset, like as a software engineer. So every time I would talk to them, I was like, hi, okay, I see an opportunity over there. Let me automate this part. Let me automate that part. So, and then I would go and tell my manager, hey, this is the project that I see. Let me know if there is any other project. Others, I have my own side projects to work on, like. So this is how, things are going on. After a year, I was moved under another manager, and that is where actually the ops part started. And I was fascinated because I've never worked on the whole infrastructure side. So this was like a whole new world of exploration for me. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. And then another team had merged under that manager. So I was like, okay, so what are you guys doing? So I again started on one again with the new team that has been merging. Like, hey, how did you all start over here? What do you do? And then one of the seniors suggested that, okay, if you're really interested, how about you just start tracking the tickets that are coming? So I had to learn the reverse way. So every ticket that would come, I was like, okay, I think I know some part of it, but I'm not sure. And then I would, find my own analysis like, hey, I think this is how I'm supposed to do it. And then get it verified. Is this the way that we are supposed to do it? And that's how I started learning the system. Then I started having one on one with the product owners who are actually using the system. Because the way there was a communication gap because I would talk like an engineer or maybe like an ops engineer telling them, oh, this is what it means. Versus the product owners, like say, just for instance, let's say a site is down. In my brain, it is 404. Where I'm going to and seeing the site, I'm like, oh, I'm not getting any alerts or something. And then, so then I'm like trying to retrain them, say, hey, when you put a ticket, if you say site is down, this is what my team is going to think like. Instead, if you just say, hey, this functionality is not working, that might make more sense to the team. So then that kind of, I think I started building up on that one and even having a better communication with the other teammates or even my stakeholders. So that is how I just started like building up. Now coming to the operation side of it, uh, the more I started like this was more like started working on all the tickets. Then I started getting understanding the systems. I started automating the processes. So during that time, I think until 2012 or so, every team would have their own Jenkins setup, like build and release engineering. But for each team, it was not like a centralized.
Got it. And which year are we talking about when you're using Jenkins setup?
From 2012.
Wow. Okay. So Yahoo has been using the Jenkins since that. I think
Yeah,
it started with
I,
Hudson and came Jenkins,
yeah,
and you have picked it up. And
yeah,
I would say that's quite early for. I think Yahoo would have been pretty early to adopt things.
yeah.
So it's interesting to know. And what was your other automation that you mentioned about, so was it like some scripting that you would run with Jenkins, or you had picked up already the DevOps automation tools at that time, like Puppet, Chef, and stuff like that
No,
from
no.
the side?
Around that time it was Ant and Maven.
And Raven, yeah. But that's mostly like build tools we are talking about, right?
So
Yeah.
the thing with Yahoo is it'll take most of the open source, but it a lot of customizations within the company, like to use. Yeah, above that. So I might say Jenkins, but the tool that it might be based off that, but then internally it might be a lot of customization within those tools. But like Jenkins, just for the general public.
Take the open source tool, you customize it, and you make it work for your internal purposes, and that's probably how it operates, right? A lot of companies do that, and that's probably where today's platform engineering is kind of
Yeah,
is.
right, right. So I think with the experiences, I started working with a lot of systems, getting to have like a run on all the Linux commands, and then the administrative all that work, the administrative tasks that I was doing. Then the automations helped in. Then we started building all the CI/CD pipelines for it. So basically, dividing all the dev stage and prod, then having pipelines to it, then basically certify the build and then let it go to the next state, and then have the test build run. The test engineers would also test, but then at some point at Yahoo kind of made it like a developers and operations work instead of having that test role altogether. So then even the developers are building their test cases, and then I from the operations side will have my own test cases to see that the instruction infrastructure is being supported for that.
I
Then
think Agile brought this whole concept of test-driven development
yeah,
and
yeah,
stuff like that, and
yeah,
people started using that really,
yeah,
where developers would write the test first and
correct.
then write the. And it came to the ops folks as well, as they started picking up the agile, and I think around the same time the conversation on DevOps started big
Yes,
time,
correct, correct.
starting 20.
And it well, yeah, exactly. So there's a very interesting story about Agile. So what was happening before was our business team would be telling, hey, these are the features that they want. The dev team would be working on it. Ops team would be like the really last people to be involved. Like, hey, this is what is happening or whatever. Training that was happening, the good part was all of the stakeholders were in the same room at the same time taking the same training. So everybody, it was almost like steering the big ship in a safe direction, and nobody's having to say anything. And then that is where it was like, hey, this is how your sprint cycle is going to work. This is how many stories I'd go. Let's start with like a 2 week cycle. And I was really proud about that, like the whole team, because normally it would be like, hey, devs are taking the training on a different day. The operation is
Everybody's in silos, even in case of trainings, and of course when you're building the products. And I think that's when the conversation about DevOps started, but I think Agile and DevOps together kind of started bringing people together. So instead of working in silos, everybody in the same room and on the same features, everybody's involved. I think that probably was the beginning of that, the good things that happened with Agile
and I
and
think
DevOps.
the more like a success story, because the training happened for everybody at the same time. Whatever issues or whatever thinking process we had to change, it was happening at that moment. So then whatever the stories are getting, I as an ops person would be attending even the stand-ups for the devs, so I know what is coming in pipeline, what features are there. If I could anticipate, hey, even if this feature is there, we might have to work with a different team or something. If there are any networking issues that we could expect or any latency, are we going to work with the CDM, basically the DNS team that is there within the company. So each feature that was getting built in, ops was there right there to anticipate what the operation side of it, any help that would be required. And I think then that is how things started moving way faster. Like, okay, we are building faster, we are breaking faster, but then again we are rebuilding it also at the same time. Like, hey, okay, this is what the issue is, okay, let's go and fix it. Now in comes the on-call part. On-call support, we have 12 by 7 in within the US, and then 12 by 7 in India. So this communication happens like, okay, there is a big project that is happening. The bigger project was basically we're moving our infrastructure, but making it like highly available. So between like the data centers, but along with it, there was a lot of ops automation also done at this project. So this is like dev part is going fine, the stage part went fine, and then comes the production part. So now we're even talking to the India team like, hey, it might go live during the US time, but just to see that global 24 hours, all the teams are supported globally and everything happens. So we have like daily communication with them. This is happening. This is the go live steps, basically what is going to go in and what are the anticipated issues, during that big that is happening.
Typical for follow the sun model for on-call support, and you are collaborating between your teams, ops teams,
Exactly.
for taking over after like sort of a handover after you're
Yeah.
done.
So like an handover, just to prepare them, hey, this could be like
This is
anticipated.
what you can expect
This is
to
what
have.
you can expect. If there is nothing to expect, that is fine. But especially during the big releases, the minor releases, we might know, like, okay, if this happens, like just roll back. These are the steps that we're doing. But the major this is what we are anticipating. And then there's like collective meetings or collaboration happening within different teams. Like this is more like everything happening on the whiteboard. Hey, this is what we could anticipate, not anticipate. So I've been working on Yahoo Help for quite some time, and I've seen the iterations going, for that application. Right from like, even the dev cluster that getting moved to Kubernetes, now that getting moved to the AWS. And so within the team, we're called as like the corporate application team. There are like 70 plus applications. So as a production engineer, I have, or my task is basically, I'm even designing, building, scaling, and maintaining the systems. And this,
Interesting. So I think this is where we're getting into the role of a real typical production engineer. And production engineer, I see as not a very common role. It is the companies like Meta, and there are certain other companies which have this role. And we have this meetup now in Bangalore, for example, called as LSP, Large Scale Production Engineering. So where we talk about things at scale. So I think it's very few companies who have it, but it's a very interesting job as I see it. So we would definitely love to dive into your role as a production engineer. What do you do day to day basis, and how your day looks like, and what are your roles and responsibilities as a part of this production engineering? We can possibly call it as production engineering team rather than just individual production engineer.
yes, sure. So my current role right now is basically handling all the infrastructure, seeing that everything stays up. I have a lot of monitoring to do.
What kind of infrastructure are we talking about? Is it cloud, non-cloud, hybrid, Kubernetes, non-Kubernetes? What
So
is it?
it's a mix of everything right now. So we have on-prem, Yahoo has their own data centers. We are also moving to AWS Cloud and GCP. So the current, most of the projects are basically migrating from the data center to the cloud. So this is getting like a tech revamp of, infrastructure getting updated. The code is getting updated and more modernized, especially for the proprietary applications that have been, used for a longer time, say, but they're getting all like and going to the EKS cluster. Now, even if you are using EKS cluster, there's still a lot of customization um, with the Yahoo tech stack that has been used. So it's AWS plus the tech stack that Yahoo is using, and then we push the code to AWS itself.
What kind of scale are we talking about when it comes to, let's
So
say,
applications that I support, if you think about user base, it might go from all the employees, so say 5,000 to maybe even a million. If you say Yahoo Help that I'm supporting, some might be like really out of the 70, some are like really tiny applications. Might be only very specific to like, hey, only HR team or legal team, which might be like say 10 to 50 people, or then the external facing ones are like, you could get like a million hits an hour or something.
and what kind of infrastructure supports this? I mean, because people are really interested to understand how things are happening at a large scale, right? So, what is the kind of scale that we're talking about in terms of, let's say, when you say your data center, how many, like, a rough number of like hundreds or thousands of servers, and maybe in Kubernetes infrastructure, like a single cluster with how many nodes?
So within the team, I think we are supporting about 1,000 hosts or like 1,000.
And this is on the in the on the data center.
Yeah, mostly on the data center. I would say maybe 20% right now on AWS that the migration is happening. But then the ones on AWS, it's mostly EKS cluster. that cluster can scale and just depend on how how the traffic is, we could scale it, scale out. Depending on the business hours, where that application is used, where the users are, on all those factors, then you can scale in and scale out on that application. We have within the company, there is also EKS cluster, like a Kubernetes cluster, where the microservices that, so just take for an instance, Yahoo Help, the application that I'm part of, that I'm supporting, having APIs from Yahoo Mail, Yahoo Finance. So thing, say even if 1% of Yahoo Mail traffic is having an issue for whatever reason that could be, the traffic is going to get migrated to Yahoo Help, saying that, hey, Mail is having this problem, and this is the support page that you can see. So if there are only like self-help of those kind of pages, which still push it onto that Kubernetes cluster, so that even if the traffic increases during that time, it'll just scale in, and then, once that issue is resolved and we're not seeing that much traffic, is going to like just scale out. So that is like the elasticity part taken care of that infrastructure. And I think for each application, because it just depends on the size, and some are like vendor-based applications. So those applications we are just supporting at the back end if something happens over there. But the ones that are on the data center and on AWS, we work very closely with multiple teams to see, what are like the anticipated issues when we're designing, the application itself. And then what would be, a point of failures? Say if I'm designing Yahoo Help, what are my points of failures? If the APIs are getting from all different other Yahoo applications, if they change, something would be impacted as a property. So you anticipate all those issues, and then you have your monitoring, the log monitoring, and even your application monitoring in place to see that, if we are seeing any issue of this, or when you should scale, basically decide, like, if I see the application utilization is going, the CPU utilization is going above a certain point, or you're seeing multiple requests, like what is that request count that you'd see around this time, and like, okay, I don't want any degradation for that user. So you set a threshold and then you start scaling.
The threshold, you anticipate things and you take more like a proactive action rather than being more reactive, right?
Yes.
How does the monitoring or observability stack also kind of looks like that you use? Is it some those applications? Is it what all you kind of set up as observability system also, like logs, metrics, traces, and or what else, right? And what is the exact stack?
Definitely. So for our system monitoring and it depends on each application. We have something like based off of nudges, but there is Yahoo monitoring as a service. Basically, you could use their APIs kind of thing for your, as soon as you spin out that host, all the basic monitoring, basically, your disk monitoring, if you want to basically monitor a particular port where that
That's
application is.
typically your system and network monitoring system, right? So with that, and it's basically a custom version of Nagios is what you're
Yeah.
using inside
Yeah.
Yahoo, right?
So your system and that network monitoring, that part will be taken care of. Log monitoring, you still have Splunk over there, and then what are the different logs that we are using? And then for application logs, you could still there is some teams using New Relic, some are using Datadog. So depending on what that application is,
For APM, you have the hosted services.
services. Yeah.
And for metrics, I think Nagios is something that I probably have seen people using probably in my last organization 15 plus years ago. But it's interesting to see it's still kind of being used as well. Probably a custom version of that
Yeah.
is
It's very customized. Actually, I would just say I just use Nagios to just give a concept like, hey, this is how it kind of looks. But
right.
yeah, and then some are also using Grafana, and also depending on what team that would be.
Prometheus and Grafana stack.
Yeah, so it's like we have multiple applications for, basically for each application, you'll go on like different levels depending on what that application and what the complexity of that application is. You can like pick and choose your monitoring stack. And then for AWS, we do have CloudWatch, and still the app logs also going to Splunk, and then we create the dashboards over there. If we want to see something, some scripts that we see in the error logs or something, and then page the team. And then there's a lot of I should say, coming to Slack now. because now everything is pretty much monitored within the company in Slack. So we have all the alerts coming, getting flow to Slack, and then the on-call could react from there or whatever. They say systems are up, down, whatever errors that it sees.
So, from what I hear about the role of that production engineer and typically the SRE, and this is what I really realized when I was trying to figure out what is the difference between DevOps and SRE, right? Because in I think a few years ago, the trend was to call DevOps as SRE, SRE as DevOps. But I think I attended a conference in Singapore a few years ago. This is pre-COVID, and what I saw people talking about a lot was a lot of observability, lot of like monitoring systems and on-call support, incident management, and those were very prominent compared to typical DevOps conferences where you focus a lot on practices and the tools. And even a DevOps role can be more specific, leaning towards just automating things and building systems versus some part of monitoring. But when it comes to SRE or production engineering, I believe that observability and monitoring and this incident response and on call is a very prominent takes a very prominent part. So how much of that, like let's say if you divide your day into different number of hours, how many hours on an average you spend on more of incident management come observability plus the on call support kind of
So I would say like 30%. So when I'm on call, I'm doing all the on call related work. But when I'm not on call, because I have like 4 people now within the team, so I get like once a month for that 1 week I'm on call. And the rest of them, then basically my projects take the precedence. So now that the whole digital transformation, all those projects are in pipeline, my current job is basically, to see that work with the developers, get their Docker image, push it through the pipeline, build those pipelines and see everything is going, fine. And then we are in those timelines. And if we see any issue, like work with different teams, because some projects, along with the proprietary code, you can change some things, but then are there some tasks like the developer could do, or then I'll be also building my automations that along with those pipelines. Then during on call, it is mostly monitoring the system. If there is any incident, then your response. Then you have your SLI and SLOs set basically for that application. Worst case, it goes down. What was my what am I supposed to do during that time? And then basically, then you could triage after the incident. You first stabilize it and everything, and then you do a root cause analysis, like why it even happened in first case.
that's I would like to pause you for a little bit because this concept of SLAs and SLIs and SLOs, people talk about it a lot when it comes to especially the emerging field of SRE, for example. And Google made SRE really popular, right? But it's been there as part of also the production engineering and so on. So, can you explain that a little bit for our audience? How you set up, what is the difference between a SLI, SLA, and SLO? How you set it up? And maybe with maybe very small example of that, right? So that would be very useful for the audience to understand how actually it is done in the real world.
Yeah, sure. So in layman terms, you can just say it's more like a contract, okay? The service level agreement, what you're doing. If it is between the production team and the development, so for how long can you keep your system? Say something happens, how long can it be down? Down as in like really not functional at all. So you come up, like, hey, okay, this system cannot be down, especially if they are revenue generating, then the sellers and they'll definitely change. But if it is something where revenue is not considered, then you would say, okay, I would be fine with like 5 or 10 minutes downtime window. This is
Five
unplanned,
or 10
okay?
minutes downtime in a day or a week or what are we talking?
So this is a good thing. This would be, say, in a month, because then you are having an agreement with the business team saying that, hey, I might need some downtime, if I'm doing any security updates or whatever that is. And then I would still try to plan it. If this is planned, like, go after business hours, like, hey, this is my down. And you could come up with that, hey, within a year, this is the only, expected downtime, or within quarter, this is my downtime that would be, uh, you could anticipate this, you know, it might be just
SLAs are to the outside world or to your clients for your application. And SLI is internal agreement that hey, we can have a downtime of maybe 5 minutes in a month,
month.
and that would translate to something like possibly 99 point something.
Yeah, the nines or something.
Yeah, and every nine that you add, it's very difficult to
Yeah.
achieve, multi-fold difficult to achieve that.
That's why
95 to 99
yeah.
is a way too difficult to achieve.
Yeah. So that's why every time they say, okay, 99.99% availability time, you never go with 100% and it's not going to happen in a realistic world.
100% is not, I think it's
Yeah.
not desired anyways, because if you just go for 100%, you will not be able to make any changes.
Yeah, exactly. And you can come up like we have had multiple outages. It could be now you can come up with scenarios like, hey, the whole data center going out. It is just your application on the data center that is going out. There could be a network outage. So, or human errors. That is like the best. You just push in some wrong code for whatever reason that could yeah, and you're testing it on production, which is but that has happened. So, these are all the scenarios that you come up with, and then basically, at least first you have it's like a contract set between the teams within the company and then your external applications that so for those applications mostly you see all those applications will be high availability even if one data center is going down you still have other data center but if you say your users are in US and people are accessing your site from Asia Pacific or something, they're going to see that latency till you fix. So there's going to still be some degradation, but still your site is served. It is in that.
It's
Yeah.
degraded, but it's not down.
Yeah, it's not down.
You're not getting the site is down kind of a
Yeah,
ticket.
you're not getting 4 of 4, you're getting some served, but there is some latency issue that you're seeing. So this is basically it's more like a contract set. You don't want because if say mostly for the external facing right even if it is like what 200 millisecond I think after that you start feeling like the site basically you're seeing that latency because you're waiting for that pages to come down now it is not like we think 2000 or 2001 you click that site and like just wait for it to
Wait
down
for it, have coffee, come back.
yeah so it's not happening right now so you come up with all it's more like in contract set I would say in layman terms. And then if it is external facing side, say if it is down, then, that agreement is, hey, if it is down more than this time, what happens? Getting a pay cut or something with the license or you're extending the license for some time.
So that's part of the SLAs, I believe.
That comes
And
part.
to achieve the SLAs, we have a slightly more stringent SLOs, SLIs, so that we can account for, let's say, human errors or some downtimes, unplanned downtimes, and all that, and we can still kind of fit into the SLAs, which are very stringent for when it comes to the actual contracts out to the customers.
Exactly. And then you can still divide them into three. Mostly they're like hardware failure, software, or human errors. That is where in these three categories you're going to fall in somewhere.
When it comes to human errors, I think every ops guy and ops girl would have some production outage story. What is yours, and what are your learnings out of that?
I have had
Anything that you can remember?
yes, I can. I definitely know that because that was like a peak learning time. I not making all those scripts. My job or the script basically I was testing out was restarting the servers in production. Although I shouldn't have hit over there because I just brought the site down like straight 5 minutes. Put any like on rotation basis. It was just like I listed all the servers in the script and I just published it. And I was like, okay, here comes. And I was waiting, why is the stage not going down? And not realizing that I've pushed the production one. So I have done blunders. And then I've realized that, okay, I should be color coding my screens, if these are like dev server stage and production, have like,
That's an interesting learning, I think.
yeah,
So having color coded your terminals, maybe when you're working on dev versus staging versus production, so you exactly know intuitively like where
yeah.
you're working. I think
So your
that's a very
brain
good
like,
learning.
hey, stop, this is production. Do you really want to do this? And then you do any of those production activities. But I'm sure most of the ops or production engineer has done that at least once. And then it is like a real.
Unless you do that, I think you can't claim to have the badge of a
Yeah,
real,
you're right. Yeah,
prod,
yeah,
working on a real prod environment.
yeah. Proud owner badge of
Part is you learn from these mistakes, and then you try to make things like, like what you did with
yeah,
color coding is very interesting. And possibly you start using some centralized automated system where everything is happening from streamlined and centralized. And that's where I think today's generation tools make life easier, because you use tools like GitOps, for example, where instead of you doing things, and this is something I have done as well in my previous role as a release engineer, that we would run some scripts, do things manually, and that was the time we had to iterate over servers and stop the services, start the services, script it, and all that. But I think today's generation DevOps tools like GitOps tools, for example, make it much much easier and streamlined, so that you actually go through the process of scrutiny even before you check in that code, and that ops code is being checked in to the Git repository, and only if it is reviewed. If you forget something, maybe someone else can come, and that's why the code reviews, the automated testing. I think that adds a immense value to this whole chain to reduce these issues and to provide internally like more SLIs and externally more SLAs.
yeah. That's so true. And I think even right now, like once we check in the code within the GitHub, there are plugins even for like security scannings basically. Say they have the like Docker image getting added, the whole image getting scanned, and I was like, "What? It is just I think easing our a lot of manual effort, I would say, and that this also acts like a pre-check. Like you don't have to push the code and then say, oh, there was a security problem over there, like revert your code. So I think this um
Exactly. I think what we call as a whole concept of DevSecOps and the
yeah,
DevSecOps pipeline, where we are scanning at every stage, right from code. Even I think it starts from the code SCA, the component analysis,
yeah,
image scanning,
yes,
and then you can also do the compliance checks and whatnot, right? So that is what you are referring to, I believe.
yeah, yeah. And I think the fun part of is like you said DevOps, you learn some part of dev and then you utilize that in the operations. You go to SecOps, you're learning some parts of security and then implementing the operations work. You go to NetOps, it is the same. Like you need something for network, what the network team is doing, and then you have the operations part to it. So I really find this
Now then there is a MLOps
yeah,
coming your way.
and yeah, so you're learning about that, and then again seeing how that operations world is, So there will be like, some commonalities for all of this, but then as a ops person, the part that I like is I'm still learning part of their world too. But I moved from like development to operations. I was always that bridge between what is happening in the dev world and I used to tell like what is happening in the operations world. So, we make both the lives much easier. Then moving on to like the product owners or, the business team, we talking to them like, hey, this is how our world is performing. How does it go into your world? And then we start bridging those gaps. So it just feels kind of seamless. And the best part for me or my work is I get to work with pretty much every different team within the company. I'm working with the site ops, basically the data center engineers too. Like the system, I'm working with them, so I understand what how I can make their life easier as an operations person, giving all the errors or whatever. Hey, this is I cannot access over there, and then it makes their life easier to fix their problems. If it is like a network problem, I might run some network commands at my end and saying, hey, this is where I'm seeing the issue, and then they can resolve it at their end to see.
Exactly. I think you get to play a role of a generalist. I
Yeah,
would say in today's world, DevOps or SRE or a production engineer role, and that's where you kind of get to interact and learn from everyone in the organization. Like maybe the uh, right from, I think this is what I enjoyed doing when I started as ops guy, and this is pre DevOps era, and then working with let's say DBAs, network admins, even of course the business side of things, developers that you interact with. And that's where, if you really enjoy that, understanding the domain knowledge, you're picking up few things from here and there, and you become a generalist. And that's what is so special about, I think, being more of a DevOps professional, where you get to work with everyone, get to pick few things, but you are not an absolute specialist until you start diving into one of these aspects and fields really deep.
And I think even the next part comes into like, the whole project management aspect of it. Then you're maybe more like a cost analysis also of each application, like how much cost can you save on this project? Or
And they have a word for it called as FinOps now.
no, FinOps. Yeah, I would go with that one. So it's more like you're not just building applications for the sake of it, but also, the cost analysis part of it.
You're optimizing the cost for your organization, trying to figure out where the opportunities for the cost management are. And are you using any tools for that, or it's just monitoring the usage using certain tools
So
that, let's say,
yes, within the company, there are tools. So as soon as you spin up any application, there is a cost. Um,
associated with it, which is visible somewhere?
yeah, whatever is incurred and what is the projection cost. Also, you could see like, hey, if this is the cost today, like within a month, I think this is the projected cost for your application, and it'll give you more like, hey, this is where you could save for some parts like
Basically, getting a dashboard where you see that if you deploy this, you are going to end up
yeah,
costing this for this infrastructure, and where are the opportunities to
yeah, where it is for you to save.
optimize that cost by maybe reducing the number of volumes or looking at the resources that you're not using and those kind of things.
Helps us. Yeah. So I think the value added with this one, previously, most of the things that were in data center, we hardly got to see any of this cost. It was more like anybody giving the purchase order or anything, and we had to go like, years down the line and plan and hey, this is the hardware that is required or whatever. But I would still not know like for this application, this is the exact cost. Versus now when I'm moving to AWS, it is so granular that as soon as I'm spinning up something, that okay, this is what you're going to be built for. So I think that cost factor, in a way, it is good because then when you're developing, like, hey, what resources you actually need, and these have been or like less used, and then what are your other options that you could. So I think that helps even the developers and the operations team.
Yeah, I have an analogy for that. It's like your health fitness tracker. So whatever you measure, you can optimize it because you become conscious about it.
Yeah.
So you may just walk for like 2 hours, but you don't know how much you've walked and all that.
Well,
But when you get those numbers in front of you, you always have that mind in conscious. One is it's you try to optimize for a certain thing, and then it gives you the visibility so that you can whatever you can measure is what you can optimize. I think that's how I see it as a
yeah.
FinOps.
That's so true. And if you have the data with you, I mean, I as an ops person might be looking at the data in a different way versus the developer looking at the data in a different way. But it still helps because you have the data in place. You can at least say, hey, this is what is, these are the steps that we could to make it optimize or like to get the better code. If there are some, code leakage or whatever that is happening, you can like just go ahead and fix it.
So basically, it's giving you visibility across the teams for
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
I think that's what DevOps truly brought as a transformation. People talk
Yeah.
about a lot about culture and everything else, but I truly believe that it's the real collaboration is being brought by one is the practices that we follow, including like CI and CD and the whole other methodologies and stuff. So Agile really brought in some of the transformation. And then the DevOps offered a lot of tooling where you could get visibility into everything. And that brought everyone together. That could be your GitHub pull request based workflow to observability systems to like all of these FinOps tools and optimization that we're talking about today.
Yeah. So this, I think it has been a wonderful, I think now if I track back, like, talking to you all the 15 years within the company, it's just like how in 2010 when I started, like, just getting the systems, I mean, it would take few months for, just to get this in place. Then came the OpenStack time where I would like literally spin within 2 minutes or something. And I had the instance up and running and I was like, wow, this is like a time saver.
That was the world of VMs, and when we made, I think cloud was brought into your data centers.
It drastically, I mean, I could uh, that was like a transformation phase altogether because the project man, like any project that would come, we have to first anticipate, like, okay, now, just to get into the hardware, we have to wait for this particular thing. And then nothing would move. Like, that this is a project that you want to work, but you have to still wait for that hardware to come. I think with that open stack,
It takes few weeks to months to have the hardware arrive,
yeah,
installed,
then, yeah, and then they would like, yeah,
and it will be ready for you.
yeah. And by the time it is ready, then you don't know even if they like. Then the first question would be, okay, is this product still needed? And then you start with it. So then when the open stack time came, I was like, wow, this is fast. Then because yeah, this is like really immediate. We have access to this, and now what are the projects that we are working on? And then get
You still needed the underlying hardware, but I think you could do it in a the same hardware across the organization would have been used in a more optimized way.
more optimized.
Spin up things faster and maybe plan in advance for additional capacity across the
Exactly.
organization and stuff.
Yeah. And I remember now when we started moving in, I think around 2016 or so, to AWS. Some of the projects started moving. The first project that I was responsible for moving the on-prem GitHub to AWS. So the fun part was we got our AWS training and then nothing happened in between. And then they were like, oh, this project has to move now. And we have like 20 days in between, 20 working days. And so now we are getting all the automation in place. We got the AWS, all the infrastructure, everything is ready. And on the go live day, basically we had like minimal tasks, like, hey, back up all the remaining data or the delta of it. Then, you know, start all the cutover for the DNS, CNAMEs and everything to the new one. And I remember starting it and the EC2, that instance just couldn't come up. And I was like, wow, this is the first step of growth. What has happened here? Now my brain is more like, I know if it was like an on-prem thing, you're talking to the site ops person and like getting it
You want
fixed.
to restart the system.
Yeah, it is going to take some time. And I'm like, oh, this is just AWS. You spin another one and just put the IP, back to this one and attach the file system and you're up and going. And I was like, wow, this was just like 2 minutes thing. And we are on the go. And I was like, I really like this technology. And, you at that point, you kind of like stop and feel, okay, you're seeing the transformation of things.
I think these are the moments that you can kind of relate and appreciate because you've seen the pain with the data center
Yeah,
in
correct.
reality.
Yeah,
A lot of people who have come into the world of DevOps, this is in the recent years, I think probably haven't even worked on the data centers. So
data.
people who have worked on the data centers have seen the pain, have done waited for months for
Yeah,
them, I think this cloud transformation was a huge thing. Now we tend to assume that this has always been there, but it was not always the case. There was a time that
yeah,
before that, and I
yeah,
clearly remember the time before 2006 and after 2006, the world changed, and that's what led to a lot of startups to actually be, come into being because you don't have to work, wait for any infrastructure. You
yeah.
have an idea, you go live in a day,
And then, yeah,
as long as your application is ready and you take it from there and you grow from there. So it's really helped the world in a to be a better place and all the startups to come up and build a really really vibrant ecosystem.
yeah. I think there's one more aspect that I really want to add on is the documentation part. Uh, so
About documentation.
the documentation, as in every as a ops engineer, every time you have like a more updated run books, because if you see the transformation that you're going from, you know, the the data centers or to like within data centers the open stack and then you're moving to AWS. There's a lot of documents might not make more sense. Previously they made sense, but then now that you're moving to new technologies and anything, technologies are moving so fast. Like by the time you update the document, there's like new technology coming up. So within team, if you have that practice of, hey, let's keep at least the documents up to date, because if there is some new addition to your team, it's going to be tough on that new person if they were to see documents. So I think with every project, if they allocate like a mandatory time for documentation, I know some teams within the company they definitely follow, but some teams it might fall back because then you have like a you just go live date coming, you have a lot of other issues to fix, and then documentation definitely take it. And when the real issues happen, then nobody knows during the encore. Like, hey, I know the migration happened, but I have no idea about like the new stuff here.
I think IBM has left a big impact on you in terms of the
Oh,
document.
If it even was more okay, process oriented, like very matured processes for everything.
I think the documentation part is really, I agree on that part, that it's kind of important. So, yes.
Like, after the project goes live, then you have a discussion again, like what went well, what didn't go well. It's more like a SWOT analysis on your own project. And then you come up like, okay, in the next project that we're doing, let's, have a better timelines or, better collaboration or whatever, within your project that has happened. And then you start improving it from there.
Right. So you reflect on things that
Yeah.
went well, did not go well, and you come up with the better solution for the next. So what we call as like a blameless postmortem
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
watch, right? So something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's also important whenever a production issue happens,
Oh,
and
yes.
kind of document that and think about how you can avoid it in the future and maybe add some automation.
Yeah. I think I've learned a lot during the incidents that have been happened. Like you're on call or somebody else was on call, but then the incident came in and then you're like, "Oh, I thought I've considered all the aspects of this application and what was this new
What
thing?"
about that?
Yeah, there's always something new. And then you get into that firefighting mode for the first time, like, okay, first let's stabilize the application and see. And then when you're doing the root cause analysis, you're like, wow, how is that? Like, I've been working like for 15 years now in this one, but there'll be always something new every day. It'll be like, wow, this thing, how come I'd not thought of it, this part of it? So, yeah, with each incident that has happened, it has been a learning curve, definitely. And then you,
I think our field is such that there's always something new to learn
yeah, yeah,
almost every
there's
week.
springtime. Yeah,
Yeah. And it's always like you have some new challenge out there around the corner for you. So you learn from it, you document it, you make it better. You have some new challenge on your way, but at least you kind of try to avoid the ones you have gone through and learn from that, right? So I think in terms of your overall work as a production engineer, you basically mentioned that 30% is more like observability, and then a lot of would be working on certain project, which would be like in working on interesting stuff where you're improving stuff, building something, and you're also talking about documentation. Maybe 10-20% of time you kind of spend on that, and that's kind of how.
yeah, 10% of the documentation. And then even if I'm not on call, but then say I was on call and then I found some issue like, hey, if I build this tool or something, it'll help the team. It could be like basic stuff like building that Jira dashboard for the ticketing queue so that, anything that is coming in, we have it is in one place and everybody knows what are the security tickets that have come or what. Basically, Jira is more like an influx for the team where the work is coming in. So everybody has an idea like what projects are in place or, the end users if we are having any issues, and then you can work on that one. And then you can basically plan your day according to that. And then this dashboard for pretty much every application that is being supported. Um, it's just an easy way. Like you go on the dashboard and you see whether systems are running up and fine. You see any red marks, and then you're like, okay, let me just go and check it. Like, is it something that needs like quick attention? I mean, is that like a quick fix, or can I just write a script to it and like an auto heal?
I think that's the textbook SRE that you're talking about. So you kind of learn, and the difference and the reason why I think even Google talks about in their SRE book is why they started with this whole SRE approach, and they started getting software developers and also a combination of software developers and systems people is to basically just to achieve this, so that you don't take just a reactive approach to it. So
Yeah,
you figure out like what's happening and you learn from it, and the next thing that you do is how do we solve it for good for a long term. And either we build dashboards, we build some tooling, we automate it, set up some self-healing, and that's how you make this system. So you're basically applying the principles of software engineering and
very much.
systems thinking and all of that into the whole SRE practices, right? And that's kind of the textbook SRE that comes to my mind. I hear about this.
Yeah, and I know within the team, we also have something like brown bag sessions. but it's more like how, say, you go a month back and then you just see how things went within the team. It could be like project wise or on call wise, or, is there something that might need attention, or are we just spending a lot of time in silos and then working with different teams, but we could just come up with a common solution. So I think that dialogue, especially now that the whole team is remote, right? Previously, it was because we're part and coming to office, then it was much easier. Whole company is remote. I think that those hallway conversations or dialogues that like, hey, this was the issue. Let's work on this project or something, that you need little I'd say extra time to be taken from your daily routine to think about it.
Exactly.
What we're doing. It's more like a check-in call, but in a sense, like
There is more of a need to bring people together in the
together.
world of virtual and remote work, especially when you are talking about these RCAs and blameless postpartum and figuring things out and sharing the knowledge and all that. And I think you need to make some extra efforts to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So one thing I'm really curious about is how has it been for you as a, because when we talk about SRE, when I mentioned about incident management, being on call, you being a woman and still, a career maker, how has it been for you in your experience? The whole on call, has it been very stressful? Were you able to manage it with the work-life balance, especially the women in DevOps who want to get into DevOps and they might have this question that, hey, will I be able to manage it? What is your take on it?
That is a good question, because I think um when I joined Yahoo, I was the first female within the team.
Wow. Okay.
It was, I didn't feel it at that, but I know my teammates had like maybe toned down themselves, or what the other teams would say, like, oh, because they have a female in the team now, that they're kind of like, they have to watch out for what the conversations are and what that is in a funny way. But for me, it was more, I think until I was not married, I had not thought about it. It was more like, okay, it is work, I'm enjoying it. Once I was married, and then more than that, after having a kid, that is when I realized, like, this is different. Like, what is happening now I have to like basically reassign or reprioritize what is happening over here. And then I have like a cutoff time, like, okay, this after this time I can't manage. Like, previously I would, even if it is 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, it didn't matter to me. I was like,
And
okay, project, yeah, didn't matter to me. My priorities were different. There was nobody grabbing for my attention at home or whatever, so I could still focus, go on any trainings or anything. But now I think I have to be very cognizant of what my time, I have only this much limited time. So if I'm going for training, okay, assign time for my training and learn, and then my family time. So once the kids are asleep, then I can come back and I can, like, finish my work. But
so you're still kind of juggling between the family time
yeah,
and maybe the
yeah.
on call. Especially the on call work is where I think you may have to be extra conscious about all of this.
And sometimes it has happened, like, hey, I'm uncle, there is like a P1 issue and I'm trying to resolve. My kid is coming over here, and sometimes I make her sit too, like, hey, you can be in my meetings too. Because now with this remote setting, it doesn't matter, you listen to our calls too. And then I would give her just some drawing work, like, just
Maybe she'll start picking up some off skills.
she's actually trying to get a video game. She's already drawn some, and she'll say, okay, I'm going to this site and like doing this. I'm like, okay, I think that the DevOps knowledge is getting transferred over there to the next gen.
She'll soon start raising some tickets
It
instead
is
of.
definitely, definitely,
All
yeah.
right. So I think we'll move towards the end of this podcast. It's been very interesting call. So what I want to understand from you before we close the session here is what it would take for, let's say, you started your journey as a software engineer. Then you got into ops. We can really see and feel that you were really interested into the whole. One is the operational aspect and the system side of things. And I think what kind of interested you was talking to people, interacting with different teams, and being that generalist, and then building on top of it that, right? So if someone wants to start with, let's say, a software engineer role, is SRE and production engineering something that they can pursue? And if yes, what would their roadmap be like? Like, what are the things that they need to learn, and what are the skills they need to pick up? And what kind of things that should consider? I mean, when should they consider that, hey, this is the role I may want to pursue as well, right? Rather than getting into full stack development or the different types of developer kind of roles.
Yeah, I think if you're like, just starting this journey, you have like your core base. Like you start with development or you start with something first. And then you're like a lifelong student along the way. If you think that, hey, this ops world or SRE world is, this is something that I want to really, pursue, you can talk to multiple people in that field. If that is not an option, you try it on your own. You can set aside like 20% of your time and see how, if this really does this really interest you. And you might not know right away, so you still continue with whatever you're doing, and then you explore those options and see. And if you feel, okay, this thing that I really like, because whatever you've gained as your core competencies, you're definitely going to bring it in the ops world again. So you can keep building on that one and see how that goes. And say for some time you feel like, okay, this is just too much for me, then you can come back to your.
So that I think is a good strategy to assign, maybe allocate 20% of your time to figure things out. If it really interests you, start building maybe some projects or start getting involved in the organization if there is a work related, and then figure out on your way whether this is really for you, right?
Yeah.
And in terms of the skills in today's world for a production engineer, what are the skills, technologies that they would probably have to?
Yeah, I think for this, like there are a lot of tools. So you start with some tool, okay? And I think previously at least it would take like some time, but now it is like every year you're going to come up with 3, 4 new tools. Like, hey, for this, but then you just see like what problem you're trying to solve with that tool that you're going to use, and you start building on it. Like for development, you're using particular tools. Then, for your testing phase, you use some particular tools. For your CI, you're using some tools. CD, you're using some tools. Monitoring, there is a tool. There is tool for everything. So you start with one tool and then you can build up, because other tools, some functionalities are going to be the same. And then, depending on what that tool is, you're going to get into that niche of that tool and use it.
So your point is mainly, rather than focusing on a specific set of tools, you focus on best practices which are important, which you mentioned about, like a bit of development and CI and CD monitoring, maybe cloud, and now possibly something like Kubernetes and stuff like that, right? And then whatever tool makes sense to you, you kind of pick.
Yes. Yeah. And you at least have like a general sense of what that tool is doing. And then you talk to other people within your company, and I would say even external, because I've been working with Yahoo for 15 years. So, it is more like Yahoo way of doing it could be, not necessarily like that all the companies others are doing in that way, but you can still pick and choose like, okay, this is how the end of the day, it is more like a problem solving thing. Okay, this is the problem and this is how I'm trying to solve it. And if you see like, oh, this is like a bigger problem, you break it into chunks and you say, okay, for this problem I might need this tool, and for this problem I can use another tool and solve this type of problem.
So start with the problem and the end goal that you're trying to achieve, and
Achieve.
whatever means are needed, you figure it out in the way. Is
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you're.
And I would say basic coding, you might still need it. You don't have to be like scared of it. Regardless of whatever you might be, that operations, you'll need some little bit of coding. I'm not going to say like you be like a code developer or whatever, but it is like, hey, you need to know basic skill set, because you're going to automate something. You're going to build those pipelines, if that so you need a little, at least a little bit of that one. You start somewhere, like, you put it in steps, like, hey, this is the first step I want to achieve, second step, third step, and then you put that code a little bit together, and then you gain that confidence, like, okay, yeah, this, I think I can achieve that, and then you move on to your next.
So you can't get into SRE and DevOps just to escape from
Yeah.
coding.
Yeah, coding, fortunately, unfortunately, you need it. Like, you go to NetOps, you'll need it. You go to
Everywhere, right?
DevOps, yeah, everywhere you're going to need that, in this one, and
So
you're going
then,
to get it. So you don't have to be like, oh, how am I supposed to code? Like, somebody has solved the problem before you. It is just that you might be seeing that problem. So if you talk to more people or you just search it a little bit better, you're going to get that code. So it's not like you're reinventing the wheel. You might be just, they might have seen like parts of the problem and you're trying to solve a different problem. So you just put that puzzle together. It's like,
Exactly.
yeah.
When it comes to coding or programming language, if one has to pick one programming or coding language, which one would you suggest? I know you are not a great fan of specific tools. You
Yeah.
are looking at it from a more problem solving. If it has to be one programming, or which one is your, let's rephrase it. Which one is your favorite programming language?
So I've just changed. I think I've just customized it according to the needs. Like, I started with Java. I really enjoyed Java for some time. And then when I went to IBM, they were doing everything in Perl, and that was interesting challenge. I was like, oh, okay, let's learn new stuff. And after some time, I've learned in PHP for some of the scripts because I was developing my own tool within for our team for on-call purposes, so that they don't have to go and log into each of the system. It's more like a tool built, and then at least their on-call will be a bit easier. And then I moved to Python, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. So it's like you learn at least one language, whatever that is, and then it is easier because at the end of the day it's more like syntax. You're like just changing the syntax, and then with Python, I think just that you have a lot of libraries, and now even for data science and everybody's using Python, so it just makes your life easier. But you start somewhere. I'm not going to be biased with each any of those languages.
But you start with one language and you build your skills with that and take it from.
Yeah, because once it is easier for you to compare. Like, in engineering times, I think we started with C, then with C++. And
That will let us see. Yashwant
yeah,
Connect.
yeah, exactly. And then it was like Java. And then I think the way Java captured my brain, because with all the UI and everything that was happening, I was like, oh, this is interesting part of it. And then, yeah, whatever the need is, then it'll just keep
I
on.
think I just skipped the Java part and then I just jumped directly to Perl.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Being
with
I always started with ops, so that's a
yeah,
different trajectory, anyways.
yeah. So I think no more, but you that first step of that's the only thing I would say. And then the more you interact with people, the more projects you do. It's like, okay, maybe this part interests me, but this is kind of a little boring, but you just try to make it a little bit interesting. Like, okay, or whatever. If you see some manual, if you're doing anything twice or thrice a day, the same task, like you know that okay, this is project for automation, and like just start automating it.
You
So
need to
yeah, and then you can assign some like self projects. Basically, you assign it to yourself. I'm like, okay, let's improve this process. And
I think that's a very important point that you make, that you don't have to seek permission every time for every task that you do. You keep on improving what you are trying to do, and whatever you are doing manually a lot, you figure those things out yourself and you improve on, put it in a process and improve it. And that's very important rather than somebody has to assigning it to you. And that's, I think, a very useful and important way of achieving growth in general, and that would help you grow into your career, go even higher up in the roles as well, when you start creating the projects for yourself, doing figuring things out yourself and taking the ownership and responsibility rather than waiting for somebody else to
yeah,
tell you what to do.
yeah. And if you are like stuck with basically, and if you're a new joinee and you don't know like where to start, once you talk to your team members, I would say that would be like the very first step. Like just have one-on-one with your team members, and you learn a lot of things the way you are doing versus what they're doing, how their journey has been, and you kind of get sense. You also know, hey, in case if I have this problem, I know this person is an expert in this one. So
You
it's
can
like
reach out to them
you
whenever
reach
you have.
out to them, and they become like your mentors also.
I think the right way of seeking mentors is not just saying that help me. It's more about talking to people and asking them questions and then getting them really interested into that conversation, and then it will just automatically happen, I think.
And you can form your like, hey, this is what I'm good at, and this is what I'm looking for. It's more like a OKR for yourself, or like more like a project, but it's like, hey, these are my strengths, this is what I'm really good at, and this is what I want to improve, and this is where I see myself. So if you have that steps, then it's easier for you to, at least talk to people and get like, okay, if I say now I'm looking into MLOps, what are the first steps? So I'm going to find like, all MLOps engineers, or, all, at least start with within the company where that's easier. Like, you can just ping those people and like, hey, I need,
What are you guys doing?
yeah, how, and then you see how your expertise are matching, and then you start building other like, okay, this would help.
So, final question, Vanita. What is next for you?
Yes, this is, I think,
You mentioned about MLOps. Is that the direction you are kind of exploring now, or how's it?
exploring definitely for MLOps and AIOps. And I think now talking to you, I think I should do a little bit more talking even to junior folks so that
Figure out what you are really interested in.
yeah, figure out like what they are interested in, what are like, because technology is changing so fast, and like, and even if you take trainings, it's like if you're not using the trainings, you're going to lose it basically. So once you're taking the training, you kind of think like, hey, I'm taking this training, I'm investing my time, whatever 2 or 3 days in this training. So how is it building, to my next step? So instead of like just taking the training for the sake of it, but because then say if it is within the company, most of the companies like say I might go for AWS training, but the way that technology is being used within the company, they might have their own customizations and everything to it. Then you take another training within the company to figure out, okay, how mapping together, and then take one step back and see, okay, how is this now going in my role in my job. So
Absolutely.
for now, it is more like MLOps and AIOps, figuring out and checking
I
what.
think the kind of work that you're doing with production engineering, AIOps definitely makes a lot of sense because it's going to help the role of a SRE and make your life easier, especially from the monitoring incident management system. That's how I see it. And yes, MLOps is something even I'm curious and really interested in to explore because that's when you kind of try and understand and get behind the systems which are running on top of all these AI applications. Like, so you're kind of a platform manager for everything that is being built on top of AI. That's what really kind of interests me also. Right. So interesting talking to you, Vanita. Thank you for being on this show. And we wish you all the best with your journey from here on. Thank you.
Thank you. It has been my pleasure, and I'm just top of the world just talking about this whole journey. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
We enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Thank you.